Okay, this is just a quick test to see how the audio sounds out here and if that bird is too loud. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how fat my balls are. On the real, in this video, I'm going to be talking about exactly how you can design your very own hypertrophy program. This is something that I personally do for myself. But before I get into that, I want to announce that I finally released my very first hypertrophy program on my website. I've released, of course, a hyper program and a beginner program, but I have not released a hypertrophy program, and it's very, very nice to be finally releasing it because this is obviously how I've been training for the past I would say like 8 months or something like that. And yeah, I've been spending so much time creating this thing. It is a very solid program. I'm so excited to have it released for you guys. And I just know a lot of you guys have been anticipating it. A lot of people have been in my DMs about it. I wanted to release it during April, but unfortunately I wasn't able to stick to that deadline with school and just a ton of stuff going on in my life right now. But I finally released it. It is May 1st today, and the hypertrophy program is finally out. But yeah, super excited for this release, guys. I'm gonna go over quickly what the hypertrophy program entails and what it's pretty much all about. So as I typically prefer to train 6 days per week, this hypertrophy program is a 6-day per week split. It is push, legs, pull, push, legs, pull, which is exactly what I've been doing for the past, I don't know, quite a while, and it's definitely the split that I personally enjoy the most. The program is 16 weeks long, which is split into 3 different mesocycles. So the first mesocycle is a basic hypertrophy. So essentially that just means that it's just all straight sets. And of course the volume accumulates as the weeks go along as well. The second mesocycle is a little bit higher volume in comparison to the first mesocycle, and also pushes a little bit higher into the rep ranges, while the first one is, mostly like 5 to 10, 10 to 15, not too much over that. And then the second mesocycle is a little bit more 10 to 20, a little bit of 20 to 30 rep range mixed in there. But yeah, the second mesocycle is just a bit more volume than the first one with a bit more higher rep ranges. And the third mesocycle implements a bit of metabolite training, which is basically doing some supersets in there, and it's also a bit shorter. So the first 2 mesocycles are 6 weeks in length, 5 weeks of training, 1 week deload, and then the third mesocycle is only 3 weeks of training and 1 week of deload. Obviously, just because you've accumulated so much volume over time that your body is going to be like, fuck you, which is why we're introducing some metabolite techniques later in the program. But I'm super excited to have this thing released, guys. If you guys have any more questions about the program, definitely let me know down below. I go into quite a bit more detail on my website about the program, so if you want to check that out, my website is max.strazny.com. Of course, it's linked down in the description down below. But you guys can go check that out, get some more details on the program, and decide if you want a pre-made program like that, or you want to listen to me a little bit and figure out exactly how to make your own program. So essentially, when it comes to making programs, I like to break it down into a few basic steps. So the first step being trying to figure out exactly what kind of split I'm going to want. And what goes into what kind of split that I want is like how much frequency I want during my program. So if I want to train legs 3 days a week, for example, I wouldn't want to be doing push-pull legs. And instead, I would do something like an upper-lower, 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 which is, of course, 6 days per week. And then there's, of course, different types of programs. Push-pull legs is super popular. My program is push-legs-pull. I personally like to do push-legs-pull instead of push-pull legs, just because I'm a little bit more fresh from my leg days, which I personally really need because of how much volume I usually have during my leg days and just how taxing they are usually. And also something that goes into what kind of split you do is very dependent on what kind of phase of training you're in. So if you're in a massing phase, I would definitely recommend training 6 days per week because you have a lot of energy, you're able to go to the gym a lot, and you really just want to put those calories to good use so you can experience like a bit of higher frequency. You can probably experience a bit more volume in that program just because it's more spread out throughout the week, and you don't have like more than 1 rest day per week or anything like that. But yeah, that usually constitutes step 1 for me, is figuring out exactly what kind of split I want. And then step 2 is usually figuring out what exercises I want to do for each muscle group. And usually whenever I pick out exercises for each muscle group, I assume that I want to keep that exercise in for at least like 2, maybe 3 mesocycles, just because you really want to get everything out of that exercise you possibly can before you switch to something else when the exercise gets a little bit stale. And usually for like big muscle groups like quads, back, I usually like to pick exercises that are very, systemically fatiguing, but also very stimulative. So exercises like the squat is really good, the hack squat is great for legs, stiff leg deadlifts is amazing. Of course, there's like, lying leg curler or whatever, but you're not gonna want to prioritize that as your main movement for hamstrings just because it's not like a super stimulative exercise in comparison to like a stiff legged deadlift. where you can stretch your hamstrings under load and really get a ton of growth that way. So just as a quick recap, you already have your split picked out, you already have the exercises you want to do picked out, and then you can move into step 3, which is essentially figuring out what kind of volume landmarks you want to use. So typically when I'm programming for a mesocycle, I like to start the mesocycles at a lower volume and then obviously increase the volume throughout the weeks and end the mesocycle at quite a few sets more. So usually for most muscle groups, I tend to do between 10 and 20 sets per week. Of course, it's very dependent on what kind of muscle group it is. So hamstrings, for example, most people can't even handle more than 12 sets per week as like maximum recoverable volume. You still just get so incredibly sore. Like you cannot do 20 sets of stiff legs and tell me that you're getting everything you can out of the stiff leg. It just doesn't work like that. But if you're doing something like biceps or shoulders or something like that, then you can do way more sets and even exceed 20 sets in some cases, especially during the mass. So you can handle quite a bit of volume during the massing phase. Then once you have your volume landmarks picked out, so essentially the start and the end of your mesocycles where you want your volume to be, then usually the next step is figuring out a logical way of how many sets you want to add per week in comparison to what you did the week prior. And this is something that you can auto-regulate, which is essentially listening to your body a little bit and listening to how well you recover. Of course, you'll recover a lot better if you're massing. So when you're massing, it's not really quite as necessary because you can really be pushing yourself. But if you're cutting or something like that and you're just really sore from the last leg day you did, it would probably be a good idea to not increase sets that day and just keep the sets the same as it was the week prior, and then take that data forward and apply that to the next week that you do in your training. So now that you have your split picked out, your exercises picked out, and the amount of volume you want to do from the start of your mesocycle to the end, along with a logical way of adding volume per week, now comes a possible addition of more mesocycles. So if you're on a massing cycle, for example, it would probably be a good idea to include more than one mesocycle of just straight sets, linear progression throughout your weeks. So that's pretty much the exact same way as I was just talking to you guys about, having a logical way of increasing sets week by week. And so let's say you trained for 5 weeks and you accumulated a ton of volume, you're very fatigued, and then you decide to take a deload, or that deload is already planned in your program. Then the next week after that deload, you're feeling way more fresh, you're feeling ready to go again, and then you can just do another mesocycle very similar to that one, but you can just add a little bit of volume to that and get a ton of gains out of it again, because you're pretty much going through the exact same process, just a bit more volume, maybe a bit of higher rep ranges, because you can't technically do like 5 to 10 reps on every single workout every single day, because you'll just get absolutely bum fucked. So I would not recommend doing that. And so a recommendation that I have, and which is also included in the Hypertrophy program that I just released, is essentially the next mesocycle is just a bit more volume, it's a bit of higher rep ranges. So typically in the first mesocycle I can do mostly like 5 to 10, a bit of 10 to 20 rep range, and then in the second mesocycle almost no 5 to 10, just very little, maybe just on like the really big compound movements like the high bar squat or something like that. That just doesn't make sense to do 10 to 20 on something like that, because it's so axially loading, and you'll just get a lot better gains over the 5 to 10 rep range on huge compound movements like that. But for other movements, doing something like 10 to 20 would probably be a good idea, because you won't get as fatigued, you won't get as fried in comparison, and you also have a way less likelihood of injury as you're accumulating volume and also intensity over the weeks. And then also, if you want to include another mesocycle in your training, for example, if you want to start including a little bit of metabolite training, so supersets, giant sets, drop sets, stuff like that, it's definitely a good idea to do that after you already accumulated a ton of volume for your first 2 mesocycles. And then the third mesocycle can be something like 3 weeks, a little bit shorter, and just do a bunch of drop sets, supersets in there, giant sets, whatever you want to do. Just get an absolute fat pump. And metabolite training is essentially metabolites accumulating in your body, in your muscles. So when you get a huge pump, you're going to have a lot of lactic acid in your muscles and just a ton of blood being pumped into your muscles. And that's actually a direct driver of hypertrophy. So if you guys are at all interested in that, I definitely recommend tacking another mesocycle on the end, which is exactly what I did in the hypertrophy program that I'm releasing. Anyways guys, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this video today. You can literally use all this information to make your very own hypertrophy program if you're at all interested. But if you want to skip doing all that work and design your own hypertrophy program, then I would definitely recommend going over to my website and picking up my hypertrophy program, because it is very well designed already and you don't have to do any work to do that. So consider heading over there. But if you're still here, please like, please subscribe, and have yourself a great rest of your day. Have a good one.